Okay, you guys, this is part 2 of the first training. And so we've talked about the physical developments that occur, social development, and psychosocial development that occurs during pre-adolescence. And so now we're going to move on to the different types of emotional development that happens with adolescent girls. And so during this time, they experience various mood shifts that can change in intensity and go from one moment to the other. And they're very unpredictable, and we all as probably girls can look back and think back to when we were in middle school and think, yeah, that definitely sounds familiar. Maybe even today, right, that's familiar for you. But just know that it's going to be heightened during this time of their lives, and so you are going to experience this during camp and see girls experiencing this during camp. And so again, it's important to be able to mitigate that and to say, all right, like I understand this is part of kind of your development right now, but how can we make this scenario the best possible scenario? They also tend to be self-conscious and lack self-esteem and very, very sensitive to what people say to them and criticism. And so they are going to be trying new activities during finding their voice. And so we really want to keep it positive during the whole time. And even if a girl is not really succeeding, because that's going to happen if she's not going to excel all that great, we need to make sure that we highlight the positive and say, hey, you know, you tried really, really hard, and like you got into that kayak, and it's okay that you tipped over into the water because that made every girl want to go into the water and swim. You know, that actually happened last year. And so it turned a situation that probably could have been a little bit embarrassing for a girl into a situation where, you know, kind of all the girls were like, oh, this is fun, we want to jump into the lake. So as a camp counselor, it's going to be kind of up to you to take those scenarios and take something that maybe would have made those girls lose self-esteem or been overly critical of themselves and kind of spin it and make it positive. During this time, they also have, they increasingly behave in ways that are associated with gender roles. And so there are going to be girls who may say things, you know, about activities like, oh, well, you know, my brothers have tried this activity, or, you know, I didn't know that kayaking was something that girls could do. And, you know, I would say that if these comments happen, that opens up for you guys to have a conversation with them about, hey, you know, what is appropriate for girls to do, and that it is okay for girls to try these activities, and that, you know, we're kind of living in a society where it doesn't matter what your gender is, as far as activities go, right? And we're kind of all equal access, and we all get to experience those things. And so if those conversations come up, I think there's, you know, a really mature way to talk through it. It's really not saying what's right or wrong. It's just kind of talking about, you know, in our field of Parks and Recreation, that we really try to open all of our activities to everyone because we want everyone to experience them, okay, regardless of their gender, okay? And then also they start to believe that their problems and feelings are unique to them. And we've kind of already talked about that in their social and psychosocial development. But this is one of those, you know, conflict management pieces where those girls, they're going to think that whatever is happening to them is so unique and so important, and you can't just shrug it off and say, well, that's not a big deal because everyone's experiencing that, right? You really have to give them your attention, allow them time to cope and to get over it, really, and because just as important as it is to recognize that those feelings happen, it's equally important to recognize how to turn those feelings around, right? And shift from being sad to happy, mad to happy, whatever it may be, okay? And you guys are going to be a part of that. Cognitive development. They prefer to active over passive learning. We've kind of already mentioned that. So that's pretty much why camp is so active. There's very little time, if any, that they're going to be sitting and learning. I think there's a video we're going to show them in the very beginning on that first night, and it's like a 3-minute video. And outside of that, they're going to be moving and engaging in activities, and that's how they're going to be learning. They're also very curious, and they are willing to learn new things, and that's up to us to kind of help them learn those new things. They also want to be independent at the same time, and they start to think a little bit more critically, and so this is such a, from a cognitive standpoint, they are starting to develop and kind of mimic some of that thinking that adults think and the way that they think. And so it's a hard balance of, you know, giving them the autonomy and the independence to behave the way that they want to behave, where they feel like they're part of it, but at the same time making sure that they're engaging activities in a way that's safe and not going to hurt them. And so it's kind of setting that safe boundary. And, you know, depending on the girl, as a camp counselor, you're going to be able to kind of see what is appropriate for them to do. But just know that they do strive for independence, and that if there are opportunities for them to be independent and to choose things on their own, you know, I think that's great. You know, like putting on their own life jackets, right? We don't need to be over there doing that all for them, right? They're old enough that they can try to do it themselves. And even maybe even leading some of the rock climbing, right? Which rock they want to choose. It's not like we're going to be sitting there saying, okay, go this here and then right here, and allowing them to be equally as part of that decision-making process, okay? Because that's a huge part of developmental growth and their cognitive development. They want that. They are starting to transition from concrete to abstract thinking. They're very curious. They prefer to learn in environments where their peers are there. So these are all things that we offer, you know, at Finding Your Voice. And yet I always end with this, they're always preoccupied with themselves. So they will take whatever it is that they're learning, and that's actually probably true for most people, and they're going to immediately apply it to themselves. And that's probably one way that they can actually learn and maintain that learning and knowledge. So they will be applying this information to themselves. They also develop an increasingly better understanding of personal abilities, and so hopefully the idea is at the end of this camp that part of their cognitive development is understanding that they are capable of certain activities that, you know, they maybe wouldn't have put themselves in, that they can lift a kayak and carry it themselves, you know, that they can lead a group in walking down a trail, or how to put a backpack on. So these are all these experiences that we want them to develop. They are inquisitive about adults, often challenging their authority and always observing them. So they basically, what I mean by this is, you know, I see like less and less of the girls are going to challenge you, because you girls as the camp counselors are going to be viewed as really cool and exciting and fun. And so while there are going to be a few of the campers who might challenge you, just always know that you are the authority, right? And so you are their leader and you manage them, just like you manage any other people in any of your other jobs. But at the same time, this group of people, these campers, are going to be so curious about you and your life. And so they want to talk about boys. Guaranteed they're going to want to talk about boys, right? They're going to want to talk about pop culture and other things like that. And I think it's up to you to realize what's appropriate. What is not appropriate is talking about how last weekend you went on a date, and who you're in love with, and how many boyfriends you've had, and how much you drank last night, and whatever it may be, right? Like, all of those things are very inappropriate. I think it's okay to say, yeah, I haven't had a boyfriend, and, you know, I've been with him for X amount of years, but leave your personal life primarily to you. You know, you can connect with these girls on so many other levels. They don't really need to know all of those other things, okay? Because that's really not what camp is all about. And they may show disinterest in conventional academic subjects, but they are curious about the world and other things around them. And so because the activities that we do during Finding Your Voice are so novel to them, or most of them, and things that they typically haven't experienced, most of camp, these girls are just learning new activities constantly, right? So they are never really going to be bored or thinking that they're learning conventional, you know, academic subjects, because we really aren't teaching them conventional academic subjects, which is fun. It makes our job easy. Okay, so now we are going to discuss how their physical changes impact their behaviors. And so, as we already talked about, during this time, they are going to go through various physical developmental changes. And so, because of those physical changes, at times that's going to make them feel a little self-conscious, maybe sensitive about people around them, worried about what their bodies are doing. And if you think about it, you know, we're at a place where they're away from their family. You know, it's not going to be uncommon for girls to start their menstrual period. We actually had that happen during the very first year of camp. So we will always have stuff available for them. You know, the nurse is there as well. But we want to make them feel as comfortable in their own bodies as possible. And so what that means is, you know, if you're getting into kayaks, you know, as the camp counselor, kind of recognize the size of the girls and maybe pair them up so where they're equal sizes, so that it's not uncomfortable when, you know, a larger girl wants to get in one of the smaller kayaks, you know, and help them through that process so that they don't maybe feel as uncomfortable and they're not putting themselves in that scenario. So just know that that's something that might happen. they sometimes will make really painful comparisons about themselves to peers, and I think this is interesting that this is a developmental thing that's unique to pre-adolescence, because I actually would argue that it's not. And I think that this is something that's very common in individuals, particularly in females, that we do compare ourselves against others, and that you might hear people, some of the girls say that at camp, and comparing their achievement in rock climbing compared to a friend of theirs. And I think while comparison is natural and that's part of competitive nature and we want to do better, we also need to recognize that we are our own individual and that we should be proud of what we're accomplishing. And really, it's us versus us. And I think that's the conversation that needs to happen from you to your girls if something like that happens. The peer group becomes their focus. So we kind of already talked about that, where the group that really matters to them are their peers. You too, as well, will matter to them. They, if they pull away from their parents, they start to have cliques and different groups and relationships. They dress alike and act, it's all of these things that start to occur right during that pre-adolescent phase. And they also have this imaginary audience, and they think that whatever they're doing at any moment, someone is looking at them, right? They really do feel like they are the constant center of attention, when really we're looking at this whole other group of girls. And so just know that they feel this way. They think that, like we said, everything that they're experiencing is unique to them. And so, it's important to acknowledge their feelings and not just kind of, oh, well, that's not important. Acknowledge them, move on from them, right? And so that we can still continue with everything else and we're not impacting all the other campers. Because they will be self-conscious, right? At the same time, they're also going to feel invincible, right? So if you probably can remember that age, you weren't really worrying about, what's going to happen if you did this or that. You kind of feel like you're always going to be okay. And so that's just from a safety perspective important for us to know as camp counselors. So how does this all have implications for finding your voice? That's kind of the next thing. So I want you to, as your assignment, I want you to think through all of these different types of development. So physical development, social development, and psychosocial development. Emotional development, cognitive development, and also some of those behavior changes, right? I want you to think through all of those, and I want you to describe them just briefly, right? So basically have a bullet for each one of those, have a few descriptions of what's happening to pre-adolescents at this age, and then I want you to apply that to finding your voice. And so provide me a few examples of how you think physical development changes that are occurring during this age are going to impact finding your voice. What are some scenarios that might happen during camp that you can envision happening? And how would you react to those scenarios as a camp counselor? So if you have any questions about that assignment, please let me know. That is going to be due on March 30th in class. I would prefer that you type it up and have it all ready to go for us. And if you have any questions, let me know. We're going to finish up these last few slides here, but definitely email me beforehand if you have questions. As far as safety considerations go, we need to make sure that we have a 3-person rule for campers. And we will cover all of this later on, but I just want to go over this really quickly. So if you have to send campers to the bathroom by themselves in Kresge or somewhere else, make sure there's 2 people with them. So you are never just you and some other person. It's always 3 people the whole weekend. You're always counting your campers, right? So you want to make sure wherever activity you go, you have that same number with you. There is going to be an emergency horn, so I have a horn. If you hear it 3 times, you know that you need to come to Kresge. So emergency horn, 3 times. It's an obnoxious loud noise. You're going to hear it. Come to Kresge. Kresge will always be that meeting location in between transition times. Never sleep with earbuds in. That's just kind of silly. As you girls know, we are going to be inside and outside as far as sleeping this year goes. Okay, so when you are inside, you're going to sleep in the 2 kind of most outside beds when you're sleeping on Friday night in the cabins, and then on Saturday, you're going to kind of surround those girls outside. Okay, so just make sure that they always have adults near them. As far as cell phones go, we are working to make sure that we can have walkie-talkies this year, so that we will actually collect your cell phones at the beginning of camp, and then you can get them when you're off. But other than that, you're not going to use your cell phone all weekend. It's going to be a whole different world, right? And that's just because girls, campers before us, camp counselors before us, kind of weren't able to do it, right? And they were too tempted by their cell phone. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen. And then as far as behavior management goes, first things first, you deal with it, okay? And if you can't impact that behavior, then come to me. And then if it ever gets